Caleb Mercer died without a name, and Elias Foster woke up with his memories. What connects these two strangers, one buried in silence, the other haunted by visions of a murder he never witnessed? When Elias begins to remember a life that isn't his, he's pulled into a chilling mystery. Caleb was murdered and forgotten, but now, through Elias, he's coming back to solve it. This isn't just a story about justice. It's about a dead man who refuses to stay buried. A quiet fog covered the North Creek River as the sun barely broke through the gray November sky. It was a fisherman who first noticed something unusual near the edge of the water, a shape, lifeless and drifting just below the surface. When police arrived, they pulled out the body of a man in his early 30s. He had no wallet, no phone, and no identifying documents. His fingertips were wrinkled, suggesting he had been in the water for hours. The only clue was the deep gash on the back of his head, not an accident, but a clear sign of foul play. There were no tire marks near the riverbank, no footprints, no surveillance footage. The police canvassed nearby homes, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. The man's photo was circulated to neighboring precincts, missing persons lists, and national databases, but nothing matched. Days turned into weeks. No one claimed the body. He was buried in a city cemetery under a simple plaque that read John Doe. The case quickly went cold, just another unsolved file pushed to the back of a growing pile. But not everything stayed quiet. Strange reports began to surface. A woman walking her dog late at night claimed she saw a man standing by the river, soaking wet, staring at the water, and then vanishing when she blinked. A gas station across the bridge had its pumps activate on their own. Security cameras in nearby areas glitched whenever they faced the river. Though dismissed as coincidences, these moments unsettled those who had been near the site. Something about the case didn't feel finished. The man may have died nameless, but something was pulling him back, something unfinished, buried deep with the body that no one had ever truly identified. Rumors about the river grew slowly, like the fog that lingered above its surface. After the mysterious body was found, small, unexplained events started creeping into local conversation. A jogger swore she saw someone standing knee-deep in the water just before dawn. When she called out, the figure didn't respond. It simply turned and sank beneath the surface. Police brushed it off as imagination, but she never ran that route again. More reports followed. Streetlights near the river flickered without cause. A retired factory worker claimed his radio picked up strange static every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., followed by a single whisper, "Why?" Teenagers dared each other to walk by the river after dark. Some returned shaken, refusing to talk. Others didn't go back a second time. It became local legend, the idea that the man found in the river hadn't left entirely. At first, authorities ignored the growing talk. But a few officers who had been at the recovery site admitted they couldn't forget the expression on the victim's face. It wasn't peaceful. It was frozen in something closer to shock, maybe even betrayal. The autopsy confirmed the man had been alive when he hit the water. He likely drowned within minutes. But how he ended up there, who struck him, and why no one came looking for him remained a complete mystery. Some say death brings silence, but not in this case. The air around North Creek River felt heavier now. Locals began avoiding the area altogether. Yet, the man, nameless and unclaimed, seemed to linger, as if waiting, not to be mourned, but to be remembered. Something had pulled him from life into death, and whatever it was, had left a trail that hadn't fully faded. 3 weeks after the body was found, a man named Elias Foster woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and unable to breathe. His heart pounded violently, and his mind raced with images he couldn't understand. A river, cold water pulling him under. A sudden, sharp pain to the back of his head. Then darkness. The dreams had come before, but this time felt different. This time, he woke up gasping for air as if he had really been drowning. Elias lived a quiet life in a different part of the city, far from North Creek. He worked as a night shift security guard, kept to himself, and rarely spoke about personal matters. But these dreams, vivid and haunting, started to bleed into his waking life. He began to feel strange around water. The sound of a faucet could trigger flashes, not of his own memories, but someone else's. A face in a mirror that wasn't quite his. A feeling of being watched, even when alone. One afternoon, while waiting at a crosswalk, Elias instinctively turned left and began walking down a street he had never been on before. He knew exactly where to go, down 2 blocks, past a shuttered bakery, then a right turn at the alley with the red brick wall. When he stopped, he found himself standing in front of an old, abandoned house. He had never seen it in his life, yet it felt familiar. Every broken window, every crack in the concrete porch felt etched into his mind. He couldn't explain any of it. He hadn't grown up in this neighborhood. He had no family connections to it. But deep down, Elias knew something was wrong. Something had changed inside him, and whatever it was didn't belong to him. Over the next few days, Elias became consumed by thoughts and images he couldn't explain. He began seeing faces in crowds that triggered waves of déjà vu. People he was certain he had never met, yet he could recall details about them. A man at a bus stop wore a faded army jacket, and Elias suddenly knew the patch on the sleeve was missing. A woman outside a laundromat gave him a look, and a name popped into his head, Marlene. The moment passed, but the name lingered like a whisper in his mind. He started writing things down. Street names, colors, building layouts, fragments of conversations that didn't belong to any memory he could trace. At first, he thought it was a mental breakdown, a delayed response to stress or lack of sleep. But everything he felt was too real. He wasn't imagining. He was remembering, but not as Elias. The dreams grew darker. They now ended with a single image, the moment of impact. A sharp, brutal strike to the back of the head. The sensation of falling. The sound of rushing water. Elias would wake up choking, gasping as though lungs filled with river water. It wasn't just terror, it was recognition, as if he had lived through it. He started referring to the man in the dreams as the other. But deep down, he knew it wasn't someone else. It was him, or at least a part of him he couldn't explain. The sense of injustice, betrayal, fear, it all pulsed within him like a second heartbeat. One word repeated constantly in his mind: Caleb. He didn't know who Caleb was, or why the name felt so personal. But he knew he had to find out. Because now, Elias wasn't just haunted. He was becoming someone else. Elias couldn't ignore the pull any longer. He returned to the neighborhood where the abandoned house stood, this time in daylight. The fog had cleared, but the unease hadn't. As he approached the property, he noticed details he hadn't seen before. A mailbox with chipped blue paint, the number 113 scratched into the wood, and a broken porch step that creaked under his foot exactly when he expected it to. The front door was unlocked, its hinges swollen from years of neglect. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of mold and dust. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and broken glass crunched under his shoes. Despite the decay, everything felt strangely intact in Elias's mind. He moved through the rooms without hesitation, as if retracing steps once taken in another lifetime. In the living room, sunlight cut through a cracked window, illuminating a dark stain on the wooden floorboards. Elias froze. He didn't have to guess what it was, he knew. That's where the blood had pooled. His blood. A chair had once stood there, tipped over during the struggle. The memory flashed through his mind like lightning. He staggered back, heart racing, breathing shallow. The corners of the room seemed to bend slightly, as if time had stretched around the space. The silence was loud, thick with something unspoken. He walked to the hallway and found a closet door. Behind it, a metal pipe rested on the floor. Rusted, heavy. He picked it up, and for a second, the sensation of pain pulsed in the back of his skull. This was the place. The beginning of the end. The house that had seen a murder, his murder. And somehow, even though Elias had never lived here, every inch of it remembered him. The name Caleb Mercer came to Elias like a thunderclap, sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. It echoed in his mind during quiet moments, whispered to him in his dreams, and lingered on the tip of his tongue like something once deeply familiar. He didn't know how he knew the name, but he was certain it belonged to the man in the river, or maybe it belonged to him. Unable to resist, Elias sat at his computer and typed the name into every database he could access. Social media, missing persons records, obituaries, nothing. No Caleb Mercer in the city. No trace of someone who should have existed. It didn't make sense. The name was too specific, too persistent to be fiction. So why didn't the world remember him? The silence around the name only deepened Elias's obsession. He started collecting more clues from his visions. He scribbled notes about a room with oil stains on the floor, the smell of metal, a flickering bulb in a basement, and a narrow staircase with exactly 7 steps. He didn't know what they meant, but they felt important. Pieces of a life erased. Then came the date, April 17th. It hit him while he stared at a calendar, and his hands began to shake. That was the day the body was pulled from the river. Elias didn't know the victim's name was Caleb Mercer, but every part of his being told him it was true. He wasn't just experiencing memories. He was reliving them. The fear, the confusion, the betrayal, they weren't dreams. They were remnants. Echoes of a man who had died violently and too soon. A man who had been silenced. But now, through Elias, Caleb was waking up, and he wanted answers. Elias spent hours digging through public records, tracing addresses, and cross-referencing old property listings. After dozens of dead ends, he finally found something. A rental contract from nearly 2 years ago under the name Caleb Mercer. The apartment was in a rundown building near the docks, a place most people avoided due to crime, noise, and constant construction. But the second Elias saw the address, he knew it. He could picture the rusted fire escape, the green door with the dent in the middle, and the narrow hallway that always smelled like burnt toast and engine oil. When he arrived, the building looked exactly how he had imagined. The paint was chipped, the buzzer didn't work, and the door was propped open with a brick. He walked up 3 flights of stairs without hesitation, stopping at the 3rd unit on the left. It had been boarded up, condemned after a fire in the unit next door, but Elias felt a pull to it all the same. As he stood there, memories he couldn't explain rushed through him. He remembered pacing in the small kitchen, arguing with someone whose face remained blurry in his mind. He remembered feeling watched. Peering through a gap in the boarded window, he could see part of the apartment. The sink was still filled with debris. A stained mattress lay on the floor, and on the far wall, spray-painted in red, was a single word, snitch. Elias stepped back. The air seemed colder now, and a sick feeling rose in his stomach. This wasn't random. Caleb had been marked, watched, followed, and eventually silenced. The building, the room, the name, it was all real. No longer just fragments. Elias wasn't losing his mind. He was uncovering someone else's life and death. Elias couldn't shake the image of the woman in the red coat. She had started appearing in his visions more frequently, always handing over a set of keys, always standing just outside Caleb's apartment. Her face remained shadowed, but her coat was unmistakable, a bright red against the drab hallway. It felt like she had played a role in Caleb's final days, maybe even the last person to see him alive. Elias became determined to find her. He visited local housing offices and city archives, pretending to be a freelance writer researching abandoned properties. Most of the staff ignored him, but one older clerk mentioned an old property manager who used to oversee multiple low-income buildings around the docks. She hadn't been seen in months, he said, and had stopped responding to emails. Her name was Denise Holloway. Elias tracked down an old office address tied to her name. It was a dusty little rental office squeezed between a liquor store and a closed-down laundromat. The building was locked, but through the dirty glass, he could see a cluttered desk and walls lined with photos. One frame had fallen and cracked, but behind the shattered glass was a group photo. Tenants, smiling awkwardly, standing outside one of the properties. Elias felt his heart drop. There she was, the woman in the red coat, standing near the edge of the group, holding a clipboard. She was real, but Denise Holloway hadn't filed taxes in nearly a year. Her phone was disconnected. No family could be found. It was as if she had simply vanished. Elias couldn't help but feel her disappearance was no coincidence. She knew Caleb. She had given him the keys. And now, just like him, she was gone. Whatever had started back then wasn't finished. Elias returned to Caleb's old apartment building with one goal in mind: find something physical, something left behind that proved all of this wasn't just in his head. The door to the unit was still boarded, but the fire damage next door had weakened the walls. Elias slipped in through a side window, careful not to draw attention. The air inside was stale, thick with ash and rot. He moved slowly, guided by instinct more than memory. In the corner of the main room, near the base of a shattered bookshelf, he noticed a floorboard slightly lifted at the edge. Something about it felt out of place. He pried it open with a rusted nail he found on the floor. Beneath the board, wrapped in a moldy Ziploc bag, was a small, black flash drive, old, scratched, and nearly unrecognizable. But Elias knew instantly this was important. He didn't wait. He returned home, plugged the flash drive into his laptop, and held his breath. It contained only 5 audio files, all with vague names like A1 and Final. Elias clicked on the first. A scratchy recording played. A man's voice, nervous, breathing heavily. It was Caleb. He spoke in a whisper, describing strange vehicles parked outside his building, men watching from across the street, and someone following him into a store. The fear in his voice was real. On the last file, Caleb said, "If you're hearing this, something happened to me. I didn't run. I didn't disappear. They found me, and they're going to cover it up." Elias sat frozen. Caleb had known. He had been hunted, and this flash drive was his only insurance. The files weren't just proof of paranoia, they were a warning. And now, they were in Elias's hands. The truth wasn't buried. It had only just been uncovered. Elias listened to the recordings again and again, searching for names, clues, anything that could link Caleb's fears to real people. In the background of one file, Caleb mentioned 3 men, only by title, never by name. The one who buys silence, the one who builds lies, and the one who buries truth. It sounded cryptic, but Elias sensed Caleb had used code for his own protection. Elias made it his mission to decode it. He started with local headlines from the year before Caleb's death, looking for anything involving corruption or suspicious activity. Eventually, a pattern began to emerge. A construction project near the docks had been delayed after a string of worker injuries. A detective was investigated for tampering with evidence in a narcotics case, but was later cleared. A pawnshop owner had been accused of buying stolen goods, only to have the charges mysteriously dropped. 3 men, 3 different worlds, but each connected to money, secrets, and a sudden end to any investigations against them. Elias dug deeper. The construction worker, Harold Knox, had ties to the city council through a cousin. The pawn shop owner, Stanley Reese, once faced charges but had his entire record sealed. And the detective, Victor Darnell, had risen quickly through the ranks despite internal complaints. The more Elias uncovered, the more convinced he became that Caleb had been preparing to expose them. The roles matched too perfectly. Harold built things, even if they weren't legal. Stanley dealt in silence, trading secrets for cash. And Darnell? He buried truth under official reports and false leads. Caleb must have gotten too close, gathered too much. That's why he died. Elias wasn't just chasing a memory anymore. He was walking in the footsteps of a man who had uncovered a dangerous truth. And now, those same footsteps were being followed. Elias decided to start with the weakest link, Stanley Reese, the pawn shop owner. Unlike the detective or the construction foreman, Stanley was a man who operated in the open, surrounded by second-hand goods and quiet rumors. His shop sat on a corner lot in the older part of town, hidden behind a faded awning and barred windows. Elias walked in pretending to browse, keeping his eyes on the man behind the counter. Stanley looked up and froze. His eyes locked onto Elias, and for a split second, his face went pale. He dropped the item he was holding. "You look familiar," he muttered under his breath, almost too quiet to hear. Elias didn't respond. He just stared. A tense silence filled the air before Elias turned and walked out without saying a word. He didn't need to ask anything. Stanley's reaction said enough. He had recognized Caleb. That night, long after the shop had closed, a fire broke out. Flames tore through the building, lighting up the sky in orange and red. By morning, The place was reduced to ash. The fire department ruled it accidental, faulty wiring. But Elias knew better. Stanley's body had been found inside. Officially, it was a tragic accident. Unofficially, it looked like someone cleaning up loose ends. Elias replayed the audio files again, listening for anything he might have missed. Caleb had said, "If they find this, not if I die, but if they find this." The flash drive had been the key, and now that Elias had it, someone else probably knew. The fire wasn't just about Stanley. It was a message. The people who had silenced Caleb weren't gone. They were still watching, still protecting the secret. And now, Elias had moved from observer to target. The fire made headlines the next morning. Local pawn shop owner dies in mysterious blaze. But buried deep in the article was a blurry surveillance still, a photo taken just before the fire began, showing someone walking past the shop. Elias hadn't even realized there was a camera nearby when he left. The image was grainy, poorly lit, but it captured enough of his profile. Enough to be recognized. Hours later, the photo was shared online by a local crime blog. The post was meant to speculate about the fire, but something strange happened in the comments. A user wrote, "Isn't that Caleb Mercer?" Another responded, "Wait, I thought he was dead." At first, Elias thought it was coincidence. Then more comments followed. People who shouldn't know that name were suddenly connecting it to the image. Old usernames, mostly anonymous, but some that seemed oddly informed. It was impossible. Caleb Mercer had never been officially named. There had been no obituary, no public record. So how did strangers recognize him from a blurred photo? The only explanation was terrifying. Someone else out there remembered Caleb too. Maybe they had seen him before the murder. Maybe they were involved. Or maybe they were watching Elias now, just as they had watched Caleb. The post was taken down within hours, but the damage was done. Elias could feel the eyes on him everywhere. Every passing car, every stranger's glance held a new weight. The life he once lived was now completely consumed by the one he had inherited. His face, his identity, had become a ghost's, not forgotten, but denied. Whoever had buried Caleb's story hadn't done it well enough. And now that ghost was visible again, walking through the city in someone else's skin. Determined to end the guessing game, Elias focused on one last lead, an old locker number that had surfaced in Caleb's files. It was briefly mentioned in one of the audio recordings. Asterisk, if it gets too close, the backup's in 104B. They'll never look there. Asterisk. Elias searched rental facilities across the city until he found one that still used lettered units. After days of digging and a forged ID under Caleb's name, he finally stood before locker 104B, heart pounding. Inside was a single metal box, dented and locked with a rusted latch. He forced it open with a crowbar. What he found inside wasn't much, just a stack of manila folders, a disposable camera, and a battered journal. But the contents were enough to shatter everything. The folders were filled with financial records, emails, photos, and handwritten notes. Names, dates, cash transfers, and building permits. Every detail pointing to a tangled web of corruption. A real estate development firm had funneled money through fake accounts to pay off inspectors and fast-track illegal construction on city-owned land. The same firm was tied to Harold Knox's crew. Caleb had been tracking this, documenting each move. Even more shocking were internal memos involving Detective Victor Darnell. His signature appeared on altered police reports, redirecting attention away from job site accidents. There were even witness statements crossed out in red ink. Evidence had been buried, intentionally. The journal confirmed it all. Caleb had planned to leak everything to the press. But before he could, he wrote, asterisk, they're onto me. If this gets out, Darnell burns. He's not working alone. This goes deeper. Asterisk. Elias backed away from the open box, breathing heavily. The truth wasn't just about Caleb's death. It was about power, money, and a system willing to kill to protect itself. Now he held the match that could burn it all down. Elias knew the files were dangerous, but burying the truth again wasn't an option. He scanned every document, organized the evidence, and prepared a full report. Then, anonymously, he sent it to every major news outlet, local journalist, and watchdog group he could find. Within 48 hours, the story broke wide open. Headlines lit up screens across the city. Corruption exposed in city development scandal. Photos of Harold Knox and the late Stanley Reese were splashed across the news. But it was the name Detective Victor Darnell that truly shocked the public. As the media frenzy grew, Darnell held a press conference denying any involvement. He called the claims false and the documents forged. But behind the scenes, forensic experts had already begun verifying the files. The journal's ink was tested. The digital signatures matched archived police systems. Even the camera roll from the storage locker showed Darnell in a private meeting with Harold Knox, dated just 1 week before Caleb's murder. Under pressure, Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation. Within days, Darnell was placed on leave. Then, just as quickly, he was arrested. DNA evidence from the abandoned house, long ignored, was quietly tested again. The results came back. Darnell's fingerprints were found on the metal pipe recovered near the scene. It was the final piece. No more denial. No more silence. Elias watched it all unfold from a distance, never revealing his face. He didn't need credit. The truth was out. Caleb's death was no longer a cold case. Justice had finally arrived. But Elias knew this wasn't just about one murder. It was a message. The people in power thought they could erase a life. They were wrong. Caleb had returned, not for revenge, but for the truth. And through Elias, that truth could no longer be buried. The city slowly returned to normal, but something had shifted. The river no longer drew whispers, and the apartment buildings once cloaked in silence began to fill with life again. Headlines moved on, politicians distanced themselves, and officials promised reform. But Elias had vanished. No one saw him leave. His apartment was left untouched, the rent unpaid, the bed made. His phone was found powered off, left behind on the kitchen counter beside a single photo. Caleb Mercer, standing outside the pawn shop, smiling faintly, unaware it would be one of the last pictures ever taken of him. Some say Elias simply walked away, his purpose fulfilled. Others believe something less explainable, that Caleb's spirit, having completed what it returned for, finally let go. The nightmare stopped. The visions faded. There were no more faces in crowds or names from nowhere. The weight that had followed Elias for months seemed to dissolve into the air. But for those who paid attention, strange things still lingered. A candle left burning at Caleb's unmarked grave, always fresh. A red coat seen fluttering down a quiet alley, disappearing around the corner. A file, sealed, forgotten, found reopened on a police server with a single new line typed in. Asterisk, he didn't disappear. He came back. Asterisk. Justice had been served, but at a cost few understood. Caleb Mercer had been erased by fear, buried by corruption, and left to rot in a river without a name. But through Elias, he found a voice again. Not in anger, but in truth. The city would forget soon enough. But one small plaque in the cemetery now had a name etched into the metal. Caleb Mercer, 1989, 2023, and just below it, someone had carved by hand. Asterisk, some stories won't stay dead.